welcome back to Between Sessions. My name is Ebony Harris.
And I'm Elisa Bokeen, and we are two brown chicks changing the face of therapy on
both sides of the couch. Today we have a very special guest, the well-known, the Edge Snatcher. I'm part of the stage crew if you didn't know. The Edge Snatcher, Stevon Lewis, is with us today to talk about imposter syndrome in Black and brown men.
Yes, we are so excited to have you here. We were just having a conversation offline of how we feel like we know you because we follow you on social media where you are snatching all of the edges. But tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Wow, I thought this was a safe space.
It
I don't feel so comfortable anymore. Be attacked, the cheesy of violence. Yes, geez, two brown chicks chose violence against me. Jeez. So I'm Stevon Lewis. I don't snatch edges. I talk and I love to talk about imposter syndrome. And, sometimes I exhibit some shenanigans on social media, Instagram primarily, letting people know how their imposterism is showing up and questioning why that is happening. So I try to do it in a fun way, but also a way that's kind of very enlightening is what I like to call it. Yes. Look at all those strength-based words I use.
I love all of them so well. I love it. The way he reframed that.
Right, exactly. And of course, people that follow us know that our biggest thing is we want to be able to talk about mental health and psychology and all of that in a way that connects to other people. And you've proven that you can do that, right? Which is why people do feel a need to poke at you sometimes.
Because I get right to the heart of it. Like, exactly. let's miss all of this stuff. What is this thing right here?
Yeah. Right. Did you feel that? That's probably about you. That's
probably about you. Why are you doing that? Yeah, and they don't have an answer. They never have an answer.
Exactly. So today we are going to talk about imposter syndrome if you've been watching the last, 2 episodes ago, we talked about imposter syndrome with Black and brown women. And so we knew that Stevon is an expert on imposter syndrome, and particularly talking about it around Black and brown men. So we want to just kind of start with, how does imposter syndrome look when it comes to Black and brown men? Like, what is the difference? How do you know that might be something you're struggling with?
I think it's hard to kind of identify in Black and brown men, and men especially, because men don't talk about, their feelings and emotions as openly when it comes to things that they don't feel confident about. So there's this air of I've got to know things and I've got to present as strong and knowledgeable and competent. Otherwise, I am now, putting at risk possibly my masculinity. So I think it's hidden very well in men. I think it still shows up the same way what I notice most in the people that I work with is that they will oftentimes it's the dismissing of accomplishments, of compliments that they receive from others, downplaying what they've done and the impact that it's had on other people. Not wanting to kind of sit with their accomplishments and move on to the next thing quickly. Because I don't want to celebrate me because, why am I celebrating me? Men are supposed to just head down, do, 10 toes down, keep accomplishing stuff, do stuff, no praise, no praise for me. You just have to do it. And so I think that's a lot of what I notice in the people that I work with.
That's interesting because I could see how somebody who displays that, you could just say, oh, they're very humble about their accomplishments. They're so down to earth. And so how would you kind of know the difference if you're somebody that maybe is like that, you take pride in maybe saying, oh, I'm just a very humble person, versus maybe you're diminishing, you're downplaying what you've actually done.
And so what I do is I kind of push back. So I don't, here you go. Snatching edges. I'm living up to the name. Oh, golly. I walked right into that. I see what you did there. You got me.
That's funny.
So I push back. And so I will not let them kind of move away from that. And I will force them to kind of acknowledge it. And so what I get when I kind of say, well, yeah, I understand that you don't want to come off as arrogant or pompous or any of that stuff. Also, you did something that was really dope. Yeah, and I'm on to the next one. And I don't let them continue past that. Like, but can we talk about this being dope? And forcing them to kind of sit with that. of like, why aren't you spending time there? Why is it not okay to do that sort of stuff? And I think that you'll, as I push, I seem to find that what happens is they'll start to talk about, well, I don't want to get complacent, or that there's this fear of, if I do acknowledge it, then what if I'm not able to kind of maintain that or live up to it?
Mm.
And so some of that insecurity starts to seep out a little bit. But if they're really adept at pushing past it and convincing you everything's all good.
That's really interesting. That's so interesting because it's like you're not ever able to really enjoy the fruit of your labor because one, you're afraid that it's almost like you're afraid to bring attention to it because there's going to be an expectation that you got to keep living up to that, and then that fear of failure. So it's like you're never really taking the time to really savor everything that it is that you're working towards.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Is that fear of failure based on someone else's expectation of you, so that they are still living with that concern that if I acknowledge that I did this and suggest that I have the ability to do this consistently, people are going to expect that. And what if I can't do that next time? And so
Yeah.
it's this thing of kind of pushing back, or challenging them against their perfectionism, that because you did something once doesn't mean that you have to always do it forever the same
Right.
exact way. I
Right.
mean, if I have a good game in basketball and I hit 7 threes, you're telling me now every game I got to hit 7 threes? Like, that's hard to live up to. I mean, maybe I could get one every game and average one or two, but you said I got to hit seven now just because I did seven once? I can't ascribe to that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
It reminds me, Rashawn Miller, another black male therapist that we love,
Mhm.
posted recently about like kind of giving his friends compliments and not putting like big money on the end, or not putting, like how you like, I see you big money versus just saying like, I see that you're doing well, like, because it adds the joke and it kind of does bring
Mhm.
this like kind of, I can't be serious in my feelings toward like the accomplishment. It has to be downplayed in some type of way, whether it's a joke or where it's like, nah, it's not me, it's you. The conversations that men have when they're trying to like compliment each other, but not being able to do it in a very direct way.
Right, right. Because it's that I'm complimenting you and I'm telling you about something good. And so what we do is we use humor as a way to distance ourselves from that accomplishment. And the
Yeah.
other thing we'll do is we'll also point out the negative, to say, like, well, yeah,
Mm.
that happened, but also it wasn't this. So that I've
Mm-hmm.
got to kind of, decrease the value of what I did
Mm-hmm.
accomplish. And it's like, well, hold on, let's just sit with what you did do. We can talk about what didn't work and what didn't happen later, but in this conversation, we're talking about what went down.
Yeah.
Well, and I can see the downplaying of it, so to speak, with the humor, because it does cause you to be vulnerable. It does force you to be vulnerable. The person given the compliments and then receiving it, it does force us to just kind of sit with like, oh, you see me, or to even be saying, I see you. I see what you're doing. I'm proud of you, and that requires a certain level of vulnerability that sometimes it is uncomfortable to sit with.
Yeah.
There's that safety, right? Is that you've seen me, and
Yeah.
is that okay? Do I feel comfortable with you seeing who the real me is? Because
Right.
what comes with that is that, yeah, I did this dope thing, and also sometimes I don't feel as though I know what I'm doing all the time. And if
Yeah.
I show you that, what does that really mean? Do you lose confidence in me? Are people like, yeah, this dude's not really all that he's cracked up to be? Or
Mm.
are you getting on me about why I'm not as confident as I should be? All those things suggest that like I'm doing something wrong. And for men, you can't. That's a not okay place to go to.
Right, right. Because you're expected to always know what you're doing, to be leading, to be
There you go.
confident, to, yeah, yeah.
Yep,
That's
yep,
a
yep.
lot.
That
That's a
leading
lot.
piece, right? I have to be the head of household, or I've got to, be able to run the show, or direct others, or
Right.
it's a lot to put
It's
on or to accept.
exhausting.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I think that like men don't know or haven't found a comfortable way to separate themselves from that. I guess kind of part of their identity.
And it's interesting because I don't remember who we were talking. Maybe it was one of the previous episodes, but with this conversation around men and be feeling vulnerable and then being able to have these conversations, and a lot of the time I think as women, we're like, oh, we want men to be vulnerable, we want them to open up, we want them to be more emotionally intelligent and say what you mean. And then sometimes it does cause discomfort. I mean, we have to have that conversation. So let's say you're in a partnership with a man, and tells you, I'm really scared about where my career is going. I'm really scared about the future. I think it does, because we are also socialized to believe you all have it together, you're going to handle it. And so for some women, that can be really
Mm-hmm.
unsettling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm over here shaking my head. No, is that because you're absolutely right. Like, not disagreeing with you, but just the idea that there is this kind of socialization that men are supposed to have
Yeah.
it together, and in a relationship, if it's a heterosexual relationship, that
Right.
men are supposed to lead women, and women are supposed to be taken care of by men, or whatever those things you were taught. It's the idea that if I express some concern about my ability to live up to that standard, then now I've called into question maybe my relationship, or that the confidence in me is lost. And that may
Mm-hmm.
not be the thing. I mean, I think there are some appropriate times when we ought to be concerned about our ability to perform, because sometimes we're moving into a space where we haven't done things, and could be concerned about career and our ability to take care of family in that way. Just because I have those concerns, like, doesn't mean that I won't be able to step up and fulfill the role. But then again, if I share that, am I calling into question, or am I giving, I guess, license for my ability to perform or be all that you imagine into question?
Right.
And so it's the sacrifice. It's like, what am I putting out there? What am I gambling by being
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable, or by being, more open?
Yeah, and this is why it's so important to have these conversations and to hear men, voice some of what's going on, because I think even when we're conscious of not wanting to fall into those ways of thinking, or not wanting to repeat those patterns, it's so deeply embedded in
Yep.
us
Yep.
that you may not even realize that this is something that could be triggering to you.
Right. Right.
100%. Like, I don't know that you can run from it.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's so ingrained, it's everywhere. It just starts out as young kids and children, and studies have been done to show that, like, boys are usually pretty good about sharing emotions, and sharing that stuff with each other about how they feel pretty openly and honestly. And somewhere around like adolescence, age 10 or 11, then they've learned that it's not okay to do that anymore.
Mm.
Mm, mm,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just it's extremely important to, as you stated, the sitting with your gut reaction to like hide it, or sitting, or even as we talk about in partnership, sitting with, if your partner is sharing their concerns or their fears, why does your brain go straight to like, oh, he's not leading, he's not a man, he's like, so I
fear,
think
threat,
we
yeah,
have to sit in that and really understand, like, well, where is that coming from? Is that our stuff? Is that other people's stuff being put upon us? Like, why do we feel so strongly?
right, right.
Yeah, because that's like a really negative takeaway, right? Like, why
Mm-hmm.
aren't we approaching it with compassion? Because
Right.
if it were our son, or a little boy, we would say, no, you're fine, you're good. We would show up and be supportive and comforting. But then something happens, I guess, when you become a man, that you don't get that, I guess, license or luxury, right? Like, you
Yeah.
are supposed to have it together. You are not supposed to be, I guess, as doubtful of yourself and your abilities.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's no longer okay for you to be human.
Yeah. And I think once you sit with your stuff and they sit with their stuff, you start to realize that sometimes our reactions are more from fear than love, right? So there's
Hmm.
some type of fear of, well, if you don't know, how will we? Or do I have to then step up? Whatever the case may be. So you have to understand what is that fear, and conquer that, so that you can come, like you said, in a compassionate way and in a loving way when someone is opening up and being vulnerable.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
So we're talking about imposter syndrome specifically with Black and Brown men. How do you see racism playing a role in imposter syndrome?
Ooh, that's a big one. So racism, it's if we already have, and I think you'll hear more of the conversation now, like when people are talking about imposter syndrome, and we talk about the institution of white supremacy, and why that's like, we should kind of reject doubting ourselves in those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thing of where I believe that's true. And I also think that it's important to remember the family of origin stuff. So messages that we
Mm-hmm.
got well before we entered into that predominantly, white supremacist space. I mean, I know society is like that in general, but
Right.
there's some messages that we get from family of origin, from our mom, from our dad, about who we are. Like, those are our first interactions, and oftentimes they might look like us, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's having those experiences, and also kind of not, I guess, neglecting that, so that when we do show up in spaces and people, what racism does is it rejects or doesn't affirm who we are. It says something is wrong with us, that we're not okay. And so when we're
Yeah.
in environments that are like that, we don't often question the environment. We say,
Right.
well, if I'm not being
Mhm.
treated this way, or if I'm not, getting the results, I'm doing this thing and the outcomes don't feel like they support, kind of what I've put out there, then I question me. I must be doing
Right.
something wrong. And I think that that's kind of the error that we have, or that black and brown men face, and I think black folk or BIPOC people in general, is that we are in those spaces and we aren't being affirmed. We aren't being told that what we're doing is okay, or that if we do the same thing that John does, we get worse, I guess, consequences than
Mhm.
maybe what John did. And it's like, well, wait a
Mhm.
second. Then what's wrong with me? Why is that not okay? And I'm saying, well, it's not you, it's the environment. The environment is
Right.
toxic. So when you put your good fruit in a basket with bad fruit or molded or rotten fruit,
Mhm.
that good fruit is going to go rotten. And it's not you,
Right.
the environment was bad.
That's so true. That is so true. And part of what we talked about before with Keisha, when we had her on the show, was how these environments are not created for us. They systemically
Mhm.
are not there to support us. We're not even supposed to be there because of how it's set up.
Right. Right.
So the work that it takes just to even get there.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not designed for us to thrive. So
Right.
if you're struggling already with, whether you're sure about what you're doing or what you're putting out into the world, if you already have some of that belief that, hey, I don't know if people said it was dope, but I don't know if I'm really like this dope.
Mhm.
And you get into a space and it rejects you, you're like, it exacerbates that, right? So you get triggered and your imposterism is like through the roof. You're like, yeah, I knew I wasn't, and now I found out, and I've
Mhm.
ascended to
Yeah.
this space, and here it is. I knew this was going to happen at some point. That they were going to figure me out, and I was going to get found out to not be as dope as I am. And
Right.
it's the environment that was never ever going to see your goodness or your greatness in the way that you were putting it out there.
Yeah.
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 I feel like that's just so important to
Validate.
validate and to teach our youth, and for everybody to hear, because I think so many of us just, I think the majority of people, right, we question ourselves at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm seeing more and more, like with these conversations that we're having, is just how much more likely we are to have these thoughts, to have these insecurities, to have these fears. And again, just internalizing all of that as a reflection of our worth.
Right. And especially when I think about when we do get the accolades, it's because we've done twice the work, right? It's always like we are working so hard and doing so much, and then we get the accolades. And it's like, okay, so like you said earlier, now I have to maintain this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that also adds to so if I just show up, and I hate to say this is my favorite word though, mediocre, right? Like a lot of people do. If I just show up mediocre, I don't get the acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to go, or it feels like that, right? Maybe that's not the case, but it feels like that. So I have to go above and beyond to feel like I'm actually going to get the acknowledgement.
True, right? And so it's like, again, I think I'm glad you said that about the feeling of me, is that there's this feeling I don't know what I'm doing. And then the environment suggests that I don't, because I'm not getting the praise or the recognition that I
Right.
thought I would, or I have to go above and beyond. And so you think about instances where we are, here now in 2022, and you're still having first Black X, right?
Right.
First woman of color to do Y. And
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. So if I'm the first one, how could I be super confident? Nobody's ever done this before.
Right.
Right. And so it's like, again, there's that racism piece, is that environment was designed to keep you out. So
Right.
how
Mm-hmm.
could you feel confident or really lean into what it is that you do, your skills and abilities, if the environment was never designed for you to elevate and to
Right.
succeed and to level up? So that,
Yeah.
again, in 2022, why are we still having the first Black, brown, Latina, of
Mm-hmm.
anything?
Right.
Like,
Right.
why is that still a thing as long as this
Yes.
country has been around? And I think we take ownership over that, of like, hey, I got in here, nobody's done it before. I might be in the wrong space then.
Yeah.
And the pressure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
the first one. Eyes are on me. I am making history in many ways. So this is history. And so the pressure, again, speaking to your perfectionism, right, that you had mentioned
Mm-hmm.
before, like how much stress that can cause. for an individual, and how much more pressure you might feel.
Right.
It's interesting that language you use when you said I'm making history,
Mhm.
because what we know, or like I guess what my experience has been, is how we talked about earlier that for most Black and brown men, it's just I am doing what I'm supposed to do. So
Mm.
if I'm just, again, the language, I am just doing what I'm supposed to do,
Yeah.
why is history being made? Because I don't see myself
Mm.
as above or beyond anybody else. I'm just like everyone else. Anyone else could have done this, which I don't believe to be true.
Right.
But that's how they see themselves. So it's again that added pressure of I was just doing me, and look at what happened. That's ridiculous. People are tripping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you just said around like I'm just like everyone else, I think about how much the fear of isolation, right? The fear of being different when
Mhm.
you already feel different, right?
Right.
And so I don't want to like leave my friends, or I don't want to like isolate myself from other people. So that also goes into like, well, if I'm doing things that other people can't do, then that makes me different, and we
Yeah.
struggle and what's the word I'm looking for? Crave connection, and
Mhm.
like what makes us similar. And so I can see how that could also have an
Yeah.
impact as well.
Feeling isolated.
Because like the underlying, I guess, message we get is that different is somehow not okay or that it's bad.
Right.
And I love to question people around that. Like different just means not the same. But
Yeah.
what is aside from that? What are we really saying? So like we put these qualifiers on it that being different or me leveling up is now not a good thing. And I'm like, well, why not? Why not?
Mhm.
That like you said is that I don't want to leave my boys behind. And again, that's us taking responsibility over.
Yep.
And I think that's a problem too, is that, like, why am I taking responsibility for them? I mean, if I leveled up, then what's the responsibility for other people to try to do the same?
That part.
Yeah. Yeah.
And especially if I'm in a space where I'm trying to help them do that sort of thing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So even though imposter syndrome isn't a diagnosis,
Mhm.
can you tell us a little bit about what you've seen as far as the mental health toll that it can take on Black and brown men? So what do you see as far as is are you more likely to be suffering from depression or anxiety? What does that look like?
So that's what I say is that it's not in the DSM, the Bible, so to speak, for mental health disorders.
Yes.
But the stuff that I do see, the symptoms do mirror a lot of anxiety and depression, like you mentioned. So
Mhm.
there's intense worry and concern in spaces, or I guess in situations where we wouldn't expect it to be so. Right. So that fear of the future, fear of failure, and a lot of that stuff shows up anxiously. So people doing things that, and this is like I guess the catch 22 is that it causes you to behave in ways that get praise, which causes you to feel more concerned or worried because you get elevated in a sense. So like as an example, you're staying late at work because I got to cross all my T's and dot all my I's.
Right.
Staying where you're putting in the long hours, that gets rewarded, right? So then what happens is that you get given more work, or you get
Yeah.
elevated to a higher position, which says now I've got to do extra or more to now cover up this
Yep.
fraud because I don't know what I'm doing. Now I've got even more eyes on me, right? So that's the anxiety. Or it's the depression side where people, maybe shy away from seeking out opportunities, and they can feel that really like real time inside themselves. And so then they feel like, well, I'm not doing enough. And so then they start to see the negative side of, well, I'm not performing to my abilities, I'm a failure, and there's that depression, right? And so they're now not living up to the expectations of others or that they have for themselves or what they know their true capabilities are.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm thinking like, okay, so we talked about what it looks like. We talked about the impact, and I know the next question is, so what do I do about it, right? If I'm not, let's say I'm not at the point of going to therapy yet,
Mhm.
what are some steps that can start to see where you can start to see a shift?
So, I mean, the thing I try to tell people, the most important things for me is like if you don't do anything, like you never go to therapy for it, and I'm not saying, people have to. We all have skills and other ways to heal. So, I'm not the one to beat the people over the head that therapy's the only way
Right.
for you
Yeah.
to get to your healing. That's
Right.
not gonna ever be me. I'm
Right.
not out on the corner with my microphone saying that. I think that
Right
people,
out
if we
there.
start to right. You better get to therapy or you gonna struggle in life like yeah, that's not going to be me. I think that if people can pay more attention to their language, how they talk about what they do, and the things that how they feel about that stuff, I think is really important because oftentimes it's overly negative or overly critical, And I say, so really getting on their language and how they describe what it is that they're doing or putting out into the world. And then the other thing I think is really trying to spend some time acknowledging your accomplishments and
Mm.
acknowledging the good that you do. So maybe you don't go around and celebrate and tell everybody else, but what you can do is kind of write that stuff down and maybe review it at the end of every week or month or quarter
Mm.
and say,
Yeah.
hey, I was really productive. I did these things. And it's just facts, right? You can't deny the truth of what you did. If
Right.
you are in sales and met your number and got a bonus, that's just what the reality is. I don't know that that makes you the best salesman ever. It just means that you had a great quarter. We can own that.
Mm-hmm.
Sit with that. It's just true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I'm also thinking of, like, as we're having these conversations, it makes me also think about how much of our worth we place on what we do,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, how much of our worth is tied to what we're producing, so much of that. And so I feel like there's also a lot of space for us to be able to acknowledge, just how you're successful outside of your career. Do you have successful relationships,
Hmm.
connection, all of that? Because, and I can see how maybe that's even more challenging for men, considering how men are socialized to be very sort of reward driven, goal oriented. But I feel
Hmm.
like there's a lot of space for that to also be something to explore.
Yeah, I agree because like as you were talking, I was thinking about, damn, that is true. Is that it has to be something tangible that
Mm-hmm,
you've done.
mm-hmm.
I mean, even when we think about, you know, was my dad a good dad? It's never really about what they tried to do. It's what they did.
Right.
So, oh, we always had a roof over our head, or we did these
Mm-hmm.
things. It's like, well, what about the times that they tried to do a good thing and it didn't work out well, but the
Right,
thought was there? Like, do we get any credit for that? And I
right.
think the other thing, like as you're talking, Lisa, what made me kind of come up was the idea that it's it's not really modeled for us, right? So like
Yeah.
what we're trying to do now, I guess, as this generation of Black and
Mm-hmm.
brown men, is to try to say, hey, we want you to connect more with your emotions. We want you, like you said,
Right.
to have that emotional intelligence. We want you to be more vulnerable. We want you to,
Yeah.
share the times that you aren't confident, and that won't
Mhm.
kind of impact your masculinity or your manhood or any of that stuff. Also, none of that stuff was ever modeled. So it's like, again, like
Right.
when I talked about being in 2022 and being the first to do X, it's
Mhm.
also you're the first man to ever show up to talk about your emotions or talk about when you haven't felt as confident. So it's like there's no real model for people to follow to say this is how it's done. Because what was
Right.
modeled for us was, again, head down and just push through.
What you gotta do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
do what you got to do,
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
Which can be unsettling, but you're also a trendsetter.
I like that reframe. I like that reframe. Now you start. So why not be the first one to ever do it?
Right,
Right.
right, right,
Right.
right, right.
Okay. So we talked about, maybe therapy isn't the way that you want to go, but we know therapy is dope. We love therapy. And so we want to hear, why do you think therapy is dope?
Yes.
I think therapy is dope because of what we were just talking about. Like it's one of, and I'm trying to think of another place where you can kind of really be as vulnerable as you need to be and not really, if you find the right therapist, fear being judged for that. That it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
few spaces I've ever found to where I can just be open, honest, and not have to attend to others as I show up and be my authentic self. And
Yeah.
that, just being able to do that for 50 minutes, it change your life.
Yes.
Yes, yes, change
Yes.
your life. And so I feel like every time we ask this also is evident to us and to our listeners, but tell us, as you are overcoming or challenging or on, this mission to do away with imposter syndrome, tell us why you're a dope therapist.
Oh well, yeah. So I am my own fan. So this is a good question.
Okay.
I
It's easy
think
for
I
me.
think I'm dope because, and I said this a little bit in the beginning, is that I am able to kind of take the. This is what I believe: the complexities of kind of what's happening with people psychologically or internally, and make it real and make it kind of understood or easily understood. And so that was always my goal when I became a therapist, was to kind of be able to make the complex understandable for everybody. And so when we talk about cognitive distortions or any of these the psychobabble we can use, I'm like, hey, here's what's really going on. You
Yeah.
got to a place where you're learning about the reality of what's happening, and that shit's uncomfortable. Like let's just start there. People can get that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I love it. I love it.
Yes.
I love this conversation. And so tell the listeners how people can work with you, what you got going on, your services. Tell us when you're going to get licensed in Texas. So we can go ahead and refer clients to you.
Ooh, this is gonna get controversial. So you can find me mostly on Instagram, doing all kinds of wild stuff, posting daily. Talking about imposter syndrome or how people are not really connected to their success. I've got a podcast that just came out called How to Talk to High Achievers About Anything. You can find it on any platform where you listen to your favorite podcast. It has a website, talktohighachievers.com. I'm coming out with a journal. I'm in the final kind of stages of getting that stuff done. So hopefully in the next month or two, it'll be coming out, and it'll have activities. It'll have some visuals, some kind of affirmations, stuff for people to be able to kind of acknowledge their good and really challenge their inner bullies. And then I'm going to be working on another couple of products, but you can find me speaking or whatever, and people can work with me. I do some coaching stuff around imposter syndrome. So, I think there's a shift happening in the field, but we won't dive into that, into the field of therapy. But I don't want to hijack that conversation. I think it'll be more controversial.
Part two.
Yeah. So when you ask about getting licensed in Texas, is that going to be necessary in the near future?
Perfect.
These are conversations we have. We get.
Hey, it's a safe space. You got to shoot to test it. See if it's too hot or something. How they do that? And yeah, it's safe. It's safe. Yeah. So I don't know that we need to be so attached to these licenses. I know we were taught that way to live in fear of if they gonna steal you. If you do this, and it's like, I've looked in the back of those magazines and the disciplinary actions. No one's been in trouble because they forgot to sign a note. So listen, let people find access to get this healing. Yes. We know that there are different parts of the country where Black and brown folk are prominent, and there's larger numbers and not enough therapists that look like them in those spaces. So we need to do something to free that up.
Right. Yes,
especially Black men.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's so necessary.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we need to go hug a black or brown man today. That's what I'm about to do.
That's what you're going to do?
And of course, Black and brown women. But this was such a good conversation. Thank you for being patient with us. Y'all didn't see offline all of the shenanigans that were going on to get this together. So we appreciate your patience and your time. We know you're a busy man, sought after. Mm-hmm. If y'all didn't catch him on OWN Network, go search him, and you can probably find the repeat somewhere. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this was fantastic.
Yes.
So I had a great time. Thanks for having me. All the shenanigans beforehand, that just means we family now.
Right.
You let me see how the cake was made. Hey, your house is clean. I can eat from your kitchen. Let's do it.
There you go. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. We appreciate you showing up every week. Make sure you follow us across social media at Melanin Mental Health, Melanin Health on Twitter, and go to melaninmentalhealth.com to find a dope therapist, to get the dope merchandise, to find our previous podcasts, as well as, I always forget the last part. Podcast, merchandise, directory. And if you are a therapist, sign up for our directory. Get on a directory. There are people looking for you, and we have a place for them to find you. So
and rate the podcast.
Thank you. Subscribe, rate, comment, all the things.
Share. Share this. These are important messages. As much fun as we have, I swear, I love when we do this because I always learn something. Mm-hmm. There's always a takeaway. These are important conversations for our communities to have. So share them so that more people can be in the know.
Yes. And we will talk to y'all next time. Bye.